I have just been reading an interesting article in the newspaper. That's the newspaper I use for most of my newspaper sources on these videos. It's referring to the Soma mining disaster in Turkey. I made a brief video about that, but this video is about lessons from history. That's what I'm going to title the video, on coal mining and how dangerous this industry is. I should say I'm from a part of North East England called Sunderland, and around this city, around this region, County Durham, Sunderland, Newcastle, Northumberland, North East England, had a very long history of coal mining. It wasn't the only place in the UK. There was also parts of Scotland, parts of Yorkshire, parts of South Wales, Lancashire, widely distributed across the United Kingdom. Not so much in Northern Ireland, but generally widespread, that had a long history of extracting coal. Coal was the main fuel, but there was others like tin and possibly lead in some areas, but coal was the main one. And the sheer human sacrifice in terms of this industry is staggering. I mean, looking back to the earliest documented accidents in maybe the 1690s, they're the first sort of records I've found. I've done a little bit of research on this. They're the first recorded accidents I've come across. From about the 1690s to the last serious accidents, which were probably the early 70s, 1970s, there was literally thousands upon thousands upon thousands of men and boys perished in the pits. I say men and boys because whilst girls did once work in the pits, that was made illegal in the 1840s. I believe under the Peel administration there was child labour laws enacted. But for men and boys the situation didn't change. Again, boys stopped going down the pits around that time because child safety laws were brought in, but that only referred to boys under, I believe, the age of 15. So there was still 15-year-old boys who were not subject to that change in legislation. You know, there was so many accidents that you could find. Just go to any sort of UK mining website and you'll find a long list of disasters that have been documented. And the sad thing is, so many of them, there's scarce information available. Some of them you'll get some of the details about what sort of accident happened, like a methane explosion or flooding or whatever the particular accident was. In some cases they have documented names of those who perished, but in reality most of them are just anonymous. And most of the victims were never documented, of course, because the reality was they were the disposable poor. And it was a sad reflection of life. I mean, even today, if you look at pit villages around County Durham, the sort of housing that the miners had were very, very humble. And I'm not here to talk about the politics of mining so much. That's not my interest, because particularly in this region of North East England, it's a very divisive subject, a very emotive subject, because the industry declined in the 80s, and that we all know about that. Well, if you're British, you know about that, the very bitter sort of battles with the Thatcher government, and I'm not really interested in commenting on that in this video. I just want to talk solely about the dangers of the industry and what this tragedy in Soma teaches us, if anything. It should definitely provide some sort of debate about to what extent should societies rely on this sort of fuel. You know, I'm not an economist, I'm not an ecologist, I don't know enough about either subject to make a compelling case either way. But when Prime Minister Erdogan made the point that these accidents happen all the time, his comments were certainly insensitive, but at the same time he was factually right. They do happen all too often. China has a terrible safety record in terms of coal mining. And that's not a bash at China, because Britain was exactly the same when we had heavy industry. The reality is, wherever you have coal mining, there's going to be accidents. We all remember the Chilean miners 4 years ago, and their ordeal. Luckily that had a bright ending, they all survived, but in this case it's much darker because it was a disaster and all these men perished. Um, I think there is a gender argument to be made as well, and I'm not just saying that to try and provoke anyone, but when I hear feminists talk about male privilege, I can't help but think about disasters like this, and I'm thinking, where the hell is the male privilege here? The fact of the matter is, a lot of these miners in Soma, these young men had no choice. That is the only opportunity they have in that part of Turkey. So that's the tragic reality of a lot of dangerous industries, not just coal mining, but other dangerous industries around the world. Often, men have to get involved with these industries, and I'm sorry, ladies, but the majority of time it is men. When I'm talking about coal mining, fishing, those sort of industries. I'm not saying women aren't in risky industries as well, but in mining it is absolutely predominantly men. There's no question about that. It's not trying to stir anything up, it's just a fact. So when I hear feminists talk about male privilege, it does frustrate me because I think they're overlooking things like this. The reality is, if there is male privilege, it's privilege by a minority of men and some women. It's not a fact that men are universally privileged and women aren't. That's just a distortion. And I do think it insults victims of these sort of tragedies. I think it's much more an economic issue in that sense than a gender issue. It's about work opportunity. So I don't know if this is going to change anything in the Turkish mining industry, but I know there were so many disasters on a similar scale to this that occurred in this country. The worst was the Schengen explosion of 1913 in South Wales, and in that disaster 440 men and boys perished. I think I already mentioned that. It was the worst in British history, but the worst in England was the Oaks Colliery explosion 1866, I believe it was, or 62. In that situation 388 men died. The largest scale disaster with over 100 fatalities in recent memory, the last one that can be recorded on the scale of Soma was in 1934 at the Gresford Colliery, again in Wales. 235 men perished, I believe, in that accident. But there's so many. Even close to where I live, there's a place called Easington Colliery. Today Easington's just a village, but in 1951 there was an explosion there, 81 killed. And there's the accidents I'm mentioning are just well-known ones. There was so many disasters, and as for those before, let's say 1860, they're barely even documented. It's simply a case of explosion, such and such pit, 90 men killed, and that's it. No other information, and I think that's tragic. One other accident I would mention is Felling, near Gateshead, well, really part of Gateshead today. In 1812, 92 miners killed there. That was one of the worst in this region. But the sheer sacrifice in human terms is staggering. And today, we see a similar situation in China and other countries that have a heavy mining industry. I believe in China alone, hundreds of miners are killed every year, although to be fair, their safety record has significantly improved in the last 10 years. But there's just so many tragedies happen on a regular basis. So really the purpose of this video is not trying to politicize anything, it's not talking about economic arguments, but rather we should never lose sight of the fact that for some people in this world, the choices they have to make for stability in life are dangerous ones and life-threatening ones, and I think that's very sad. And I just hope there's a situation in the future whereby these men can get opportunities that are a lot safer, and that governments can find ways to make fuel extraction safer. There's no easy answers, but I do hope some lessons are learnt from Soma. All these disasters in the UK, a lot of them, some of them, have plaques and memorials, but many of them are long forgotten by the public psyche. I mean, last year there was barely anything to remember the centenary of the Shinganit disaster. And if you look at it this way, if the worst disaster is forgotten, then what about all the other tragedies? So, for me, this just really demonstrates the danger of coal. And we must never ever overlook the sacrifices these men make. Thanks for watching.